Well, hello, Leigh.
Hello, Fi. How are we?
Welcome back, everyone, to Queer Gals Watch the West Wing.
How we doing?
I'm well, thriving under the oppressive nature of modern life.
Yes, agreed. There was a guest instructor at my CrossFit today who was doing cover, and he called me Sweet Pea, having not asked my name.
That's rough.
Little faster on the rower there, Sweet Pea.
No, I don't
I
think...
hate it.
I don't think I like that, unprompted from a man I don't know.
Yeah.
I think from, a gal pal, I would love Sweet Pea.
Really fun.
Really fun.
My friend's dad used to call her Sweet Pea, and then she had sweet peas in her bouquet when she got married, which I find very emotional. I just don't like it from a CrossFit instructor I've never met.
You absolutely devastated me.
You cannot start crying now. We're going into a Christmas episode, Fiona. Pull yourself together.
Yeah, so listeners, I think it's very safe to say that I would like this episode to come with some sort of emotional warning because I cried so much watching episode 10, season 1 of The West Wing.
It was very like Toby Ziegler, It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh my God, Leigh. It really was.
Just wandering the streets of DC alone in a wool coat.
Just wondering about the purpose of his own life. I honestly, I know I keep saying this week on week going, this was my favourite episode, but this was my favourite episode.
Well, Fi, should we get into it?
Let's crack on in. So I'm going to head into the episode recap, which will be episode 10, season 1 of The West Wing. And this episode is yet again another Latin titled episode.
Our second Latin titled episode, which, dare I say again, name one thing a female screenwriter could never get away with.
It's just Aaron Sorkin once again being like, I'm clever than you and you're a stupid underling. The episode is called In Excelsis Dio, which translates as Glory to God in the Highest. So maybe a hymn title?
How are we doing on that separation of church and state, lads?
I mean, famously, Jed Bartlett, not a fan. He loves to talk about religion. But yeah, let's go for it. It's December 23rd, baby.
It's Christmas. It's the millennium, guys.
It is Christmas 1999 in the White House, and everyone is jazzed for the millennium, except who, Leigh?
Toby Ziegler.
Obviously, Toby Ziegler.
Resident lesbian.
Resident grumpy lesbian is the only person on the planet who would refuse to celebrate the millennium just out of principle that it isn't correctly the new millennium until 2001. So Toby's coming in with strong vibes straight out the door. We're doing a lot of tracking shots of the White House in Christmas decor. And Leigh, it's an impeccable holiday season vibe. The aesthetic is very late 90s Christmas. It's very Home Alone. It's Miracle on 34th Street. It's When Harry Met Sally. It's really giving Nora Ephron interiors. Click my seatbelt in. I am here for the ride.
Yeah. Also, obviously, historically speaking, we are hot off the heels of the great dynamic duo of the 90s, which was Hillary Clinton and Martha Stewart. Just two kind of vaguely problematic blonde women in the American psyche decorating the White House for Christmas.
Stunning. No notes. There's quite a lot of frisky and free energy in this episode. I think all of the White House stuff are quite excited for Christmas. And so it's little fun comedy bits intercut with devastating drama. So one of these fun little bits that we have this week is everyone's Secret Service code names
have been changed, which I guess happens routinely.
Yeah, and CJ's found out that her Secret Service code name is Flamingo, which I take great offence at, as does CJ. And so we do find out some other people's through the episode, but Leigh, I was wondering if we could have a quick moment to discuss what we believe some people's code names would be.
Oh, I think I could see Josh being Gecko.
Please expand.
He just gives me Gecko vibes.
Okay. Okay.
I'm going to say Sam Seaborn. He's giving me Meerkat.
I feel like
think-
Toby Ziegler would be like honey badger.
Yes. Yes. I think Martin Sheen, Silverback.
Oh, okay. I thought we'd go for something like a bit more like kind of classic, like American Eagle.
But then he's the name of a well-known high street teen shopping brand.
Which is problematic in its own way. And Stockard Channing.
Liger.
This is not some of our best improv work, but I don't hate it. Quite early on, Toby is summoned by the DC police. Oh, but why? Cut to slow tracking shots of war memorials.
Yeah.
Leigh, you put in the notes, it's giving Band of Brothers.
Yeah, there was a shot of what I thought was the World War II memorial, but it is in fact the Korean War memorial.
Yes. And I do feel like it would make sense to, at this point, make quite a strong disclosure. My favourite TV show of all time is Band of Brothers. Like, I can't express in words how much I love that show. So when anything gives vaguely any vibe along sort of like brotherhood in war, I am there.
She's there.
I'm there emotionally, like I'm on the brink of tears. So when Leigh was like, I think it's the World War II memorial, I was like, it is not. And I know that because when I went to the United States, I went to DC partially to see the war memorials.
Now, I also went to DC and also saw the war memorials because I went to the Nationals for National History Day with my historical performance. But I was 14 and I was obviously deeply concerned about my Nationals performance. So I didn't pay as much attention when I was visiting the war memorials. I will say, though, no one does a war memorial quite like the Americans.
I could not agree more. Americans just get it. It's a full immersive experience.
Truly.
You know? Just the attention to detail, the vibe of the area. Like, it's not just the actual like monument or statue, or they love a fountain, but like it's sensational. I remember having a lovely time at the World War II Memorial in DC because what did I do, Leigh? I just stood and cried for a while. Unhinged behavior. I'm going to assume that like in some sort of spiritualist way, like I have in me like the spirit of someone who lost someone in the Second World War. Like I don't have a lot of skin in the game. But I do have a lot of feelings.
No, I think you, in another life, I think you were in that Sarah Waters book about the women.
Oh my God, the Night Watch.
The Night Watch. I think you were like the real life woman in the Night Watch in your last life. And then I think the Blitz got you.
Yeah. Do you think I was like Kay and I was like working in like an ambulance and then bam, direct hit. Savage. What a way to go.
Dare I say, if you'd been in the Night Watch, though, you would have excelled, Fiona.
I honestly feel like if I'd been alive during World War II, I would have been saving lives and getting laid.
Give the woman a megaphone.
Let me organise some traffic. And then just come home to a good woman who's made me a hot meal, you know? Yeah. Anyway, enough about my potential fictional past life. Because Leigh, there is a dead man on a bench.
Walter Hufnagel.
Walter Hufnagel is the man in question. And that was the reason why Toby was summoned by the police was Walter was wearing a big coat and it had Toby's business card in the pocket. But it turns out that Toby said he didn't know Walter. It's just that he'd given his coat to the Goodwill and Walter must have bought it.
This is where I started crying.
I know. And Toby is very upset by the whole thing. And there's a kind of Secret Service agent / detective from DC Police who's deeply unbothered by the whole thing. And it's just like, yeah, you know, this happens a lot this time of year. Like people who are unhoused, you know, it gets cold.
Yeah.
And Toby's like, but, you know, do you know if he's got any family? Like, look at the tattoo on his arm. He was a Marine and he served in Korea.
Yeah.
Which starts the storyline that spreads through this episode, Leigh, which is, what is Toby's connection to veterans?
I need to know. It's never explained.
There's a backstory there.
And like, when he's asked if he's served, he leaves the question unanswered.
And I I don't know, Leigh. I don't know. I would love that as a backstory for him.
Or he lost his boyfriend.
Oh my God.
To combat.
Or like a brother, like an older brother.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like seeds are being planted that we're going to come back to.
I think it's deeper than just him being sad about veterans.
100%.
Let's cut away from this kind of gentle, caring soul that is Toby Ziegler and go back to
my eyes.
Go back to Josh and Donna, who are again doing their usual thing of like flirting outrageously in corridors where other people are just trying to do their work.
In a lovely red festive jumper from Donna. I love a red festive jumper.
And then she's gone for like an ankle length, like navy skirt. Love it. Great outfit. I would love a midi moment outfit.
From Donna.
So the sort of sexy banter this time round is kind of like Josh taking the piss out of Donna's Protestant family, which is like we kind of quite love a little bit of like religious banter between friends. I think potentially very backward of me, but like I assumed because Donna's name is Donatella that her family was Italian and therefore she would be Catholic.
Yeah. I mean, she has a Protestant look about her. She doesn't look
very
particularly
She's
Italian,
very waspy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how backward of me. That'll show me.
She's one of yours, Fi.
She's one of mine. That's the kind of in-joke that me and Leigh have, that we split people into Protestants and Catholics.
We also, when we're on holiday and we see churches, we say, is that one of yours or is it one of mine?
Yeah, just for some context. Not because,
we're building bridges between the Catholic-Protestant divide 100 years after the fact, because in a story that we may tell at some stage, basically our great-grandfathers nearly killed each other in combat in Ireland. But we'll leave that little breadcrumb for another day.
So exactly in the way that co-workers would do, Donna has given Josh a like Santa list of things that she wants for Christmas that isn't at all like flirtatious and loaded as like, I kind of love you and fancy you. It's just like, oh, like what have you bought for me for Christmas? Like, I'm sorry, you're not friends.
You're not friends. It's very coded like the beginning of the holiday when she's like, oh, that's so convenient. I've got you something as well. And he's like, oh, darling, I don't actually have it with me.
Yes.
Just a Kate Winslet deep cut from me there.
No, and I know exactly the point that you're referencing. Isn't it like a vintage book that she gives him?
It's a first edition of his favourite book, yeah.
Yeah, so very much ties into this episode with our trip to the bookstore later. Anyway, so Donna wants to learn to ski, and that is Donna's thing that she talks about. Sometimes it's like sorcerers. Sometimes it's people's necks.
Sometimes it's budget reconciliation and wanting a DVD player.
But this week it is that she wants to learn to ski and she wants Josh to buy her all of the ski gear that she needs.
You know what? I respect the graft.
Yeah. And at some point it will happen and they will get together and I'll be happy. But until then, I'm just going to be furious that they make this all of their co-workers' business. Anyway, enough flirting because Josh needs to find Leo. And we have a brilliant entrance into Leo's office. Margaret, his executive assistant, is essentially buried under a pile of wrapping paper and Christmas cards. Leo's kind of like half-heartedly helping her write these Christmas cards. And she is furiously furious. And I just get this idea that like Leo is a very... As we learnt with the wedding anniversary, the fateful wedding anniversary, I think he's not a very organised man when it comes to gift giving.
No, and I will say, like, as someone who's been a PA, a team PA, an EA, all of these things, very much like the organisation of the Christmas, for lack of a better word, bullshit does entirely fall on you. But you do also have the power to piss off like every business associate your boss has ever had if you get the tone of a message wrong or you get the wrong level of gift for the wrong. It's incredibly stressful.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. And I also feel like, Leo doesn't have Jenny this year. And I wonder if some of that labour has been put on to Margaret's shoulders.
Yeah. Like, I wonder if ordinarily Margaret would actually be coordinating this with Jenny.
At the end of the day, like, Mallory's off doing her own thing. She doesn't want to help.
Yeah.
She's too busy wearing a smoky eye to elementary school. Chasing tail and teaching youths. So Josh asks if he can have a minute with Leo. Leo says, leave us for a minute. And Margaret just says, we're not done.
Love that from her.
And he sort of gives her a look, and then she leaves and throws him the dirtiest look I have ever seen, which makes me think that they have been like trying to deal with this pile of gifts for some hours.
I reckon that this is like Margaret's third or fourth attempt to finish this task, and it just keeps getting interrupted.
By like genuinely important things.
And she can't tick it off her to-do list because every time she gets him on the job, it gets interrupted.
I just think that come Christmas, I know that Donna is asking for a full set of ski equipment, but it is the time to think of your EA and buy them something special.
Agreed.
The reason Josh has gone to Leo is to come back to what was mentioned in the previous episode, which is surrounding Congressman Lillianfield and the information about White House staffers using drugs, and particularly the fact that Leo has had a journey with drug addiction and is in recovery, and that Lillianfield knows that he attended a rehab center and has got some of the documentation from that rehab center. So we're kind of coming back to a previous storyline, which is what Leigh and I have been gasping for all season. And Josh has got some new information, which is that Lillianfield is planning to leak the information about Leo and Leo's time in rehab after Christmas. So suddenly, like, the stakes have got even higher. And Josh's idea is, he says, oh, Sam has a friend. And it seems like what Josh is saying is that he wants to use Laurie and Sam as like almost like a preemptive strike to distract from Lillianfield's info on Leo. And Leo shuts it down immediately and is like, we don't do these things.
Yeah, so what he's suggesting is that they go to Laurie and Laurie give up some information about any Republicans who she has as clients. So that then they can almost do, we won't tell if you don't tell exchange.
And obviously, in terms of like Josh coming up with a plan, it is a plan. But I respect from Leo that he's like, I don't want to drag this woman I don't know into this.
Yeah.
And her business and her private life. That seems very much like not what we do.
Yeah.
So a lovely, respectful vibe from Leo there. The next kind of key plot point comes up in this meeting where Leo says, did you hear about this kid in Minnesota? It transpires that a gay high school senior has got beaten up. They stripped him, tied him to a tree and threw rocks and bottles at his head. And Leo says, we have to revisit hate crime legislation after the break. And it was quite shocking to Leigh and I to have them kind of out of nowhere, such a devastating and violent homophobic attack spoken about on this show.
Yeah, because for context, obviously, me and Fi met where else but on a theatre degree, where we happened to study the documentary play, The Laramie Project, which I believe is the same incident that this story in The West Wing is based off of.
Yes. So back in 1998 in Wyoming, a young man, a 21-year-old university student, Matthew Shepard, was murdered. He was brutally tortured and left for dead, tied to a fence. And then he died several days later in hospital of his injuries. And the attack was perpetrated by two other men in their early 20s. And their side of the story, that it was all a robbery gone wrong. But they also attempted to use the gay panic defense when they were at trial. But the brutality of that attack on Matthew Shepard reverberated around the whole of America and the world. And it really sparked a huge amount of debate around hate crime laws in the US. And I think what we're seeing here in this episode is 100% kind of shining a light on that in this fictional White House that we have in The West Wing.
Is a big hot button issue and debate of the day was about hate crime legislation at this point, yeah.
Because at time of airing, we're 1999 into 2000. So this is very recent history in America at this point for Aaron Sorkin and his team to be writing around. And Bill Clinton, after Matthew Shepard's death, did renew attempts to extend federal hate crime legislation to include gay people, women, and people with disabilities. And this was kind of already going through the Senate at the time of Matthew's murder. But it was sort of spurred on by that news. And it was passed by Congress in 2000, but the legislation was massively reduced by a conference committee. Is that the same as a caucus?
Very similar, but it's like rather than a caucus is just like a block that all votes together, a conference committee is like slightly more strategic in that they're planning ahead for things, basically.
And just to kind of like finish this tiny little lesson learning thing I'm doing here, which feels very, very strange. This is normally what Leigh does. In early 2007, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was introduced to Congress. So this was kind of a new bill. And the bill did pass through the House of Representatives and the Senate. However, lovely man that he is, George W. Bush indicated that he would veto the legislation if it reached his desk. So that was kind of the end of that one for a little while. And the bill kind of dragged on back and forth some more. Nancy Pelosi got involved for a couple of years and was really driving force behind it. Barack, when he became president, was also very much behind the bill. But it wasn't until October 2009 that the act was signed into law.
So 11 years after Matthew Shepard's murder.
Yeah. And bringing it all back to the West Wing, I think is actually incredibly on the pulse for their version of an incident like this to be used as a storyline. And is it a shame that the first storyline surrounding sexuality has to kind of be about a violent crime? Yes, it is. But I suppose we do have to give some credit or a moment of reflection to the fact that we are in the year 2000 when we're talking about this. And I mean, in the UK, the Civil Partnership Act wasn't passed until 2004.
Yeah.
And gay marriage wasn't legal in the UK until 2013.
We're also very much in the height of Section 28 at this point in the UK, are we not? Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, the aftermath of very damaging prime ministers like Margaret Thatcher, who, you know, did many, many horrible and unforgivable things towards the queer community in the UK. And so I think it's quite exciting in a way for a high budget, quality TV series in the States to be discussing hate crime legislation. And like, when something happens, what do we do?
Yeah.
Rather than just kind of putting violent crime up on a pedestal and being like, wow, isn't that terrible? That thing happened.
Yeah.
I think the reason why I've waffled on about this for so long is that I love that we have this reference to this, you know, horrible crime, and immediately the most powerful characters in this show are like, we need to come back to this and think about what we can do to help.
Yeah, and I found the argument that's being made against this legislation in this episode really interesting in terms of saying, well, you can't legislate what's in people's heads when they commit a particular action. But I find that so interesting as an argument, because in crime and in criminal prosecution of any kind, criminal intent has such a big part to play in whether someone is found guilty in the first degree or the second degree, like whether it's murder or manslaughter. So what is in your head when you're doing the crime is always significant and important.
Yeah.
And of course, if you have an issue with a particular part of someone's identity who you've attacked, of course that has an impact on whether you have a motive or not.
Right. So I kind of hate the whole like devil's advocate game sometimes, but in this sense, they do it quite well through this episode, which we'll come back to because there's some other quite nice, other characters get to have their like words on what's happened. So we do like that. And just coming back to the Laramie Project, the documentary play, guess who was in a production of that, Leigh? Stockard Channing.
Love that for her.
So like a little full circle moment for us here. So we then go to CJ very briefly. She's kind of starting to discuss how to talk to the press about this incident that's happened in Minnesota with this young man. She also, not to dramatically change the mood, but she also talks about the Bartlett's Christmas. And I'm wondering just if we just take a moment to dive into what you feel the Bartlett's Christmas is, Leigh.
I feel that they have a chef that comes and cooks, but then Jed goes into the kitchens to carve.
I was going to say, because going back to my beer, my daughter, my chili, I wonder if there's like a part of the Christmas dinner that Jed's like, oh, I do the cranberry sauce.
I think he just strongly comes in to take all the glory and carve at the end.
Yeah. I kind of see Abby Bartlett like in like a lovely festive pajama and like lovely dressing gown and slippers, like kind of about the house with like cups of coffee in the morning, like perhaps taking the newspaper upstairs to read in bed.
I think Abby has a rogue sister who's like a divorcee who's invited.
Yes. Who Jed like suffers through. And I feel like Zoe always makes like a centerpiece for the Christmas table.
Yeah.
Frankly, in my mind, I would love to spend Christmas with the Bartletts.
Yeah, agreed.
Although after a few festive glasses of wine, would at some point we just need Jed to stop talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Leigh, as per usual, Mandy is given one thing to do in this episode.
It's just so tough because we're dealing with like a homeless man who's died of exposure, who's also a war hero. And we're dealing with a hate crime against a young man who's been murdered. Those are kind of the emotional stakes we're dealing with. And yet again, we've given Mandy a problem that she can obsess over that is not a problem.
No.
That is just so trivial in regards to everything else that happens in the episode. And
because she's organising like a Christmas party at the White House where some children are going to come and sing in a choir and like get given like a present by the president.
It just feels like she just gets written as a nag, and it's so difficult because they could have done so much more with her character.
Like Toby is literally like trying to track down this veteran's family, and Mandy comes into his office and is like, do you think the Santa hats and the Dickensian costumes are clashing?
It's so difficult because like at least Donna gets to be funny.
Yeah. And like, obviously Toby's like, I don't care about the Santa hats and the Dickensian costumes. And she's like, oh, well, you're supposed to care. It's going to be in the press. And it's like, there's just nowhere for her to go.
Yeah. It's just adding insult to injury to Mandy at this point.
So I think previously we've spoken about how like gossip travels really quickly in the White House. And especially when we were looking at the Cassidy Hutchinson stuff, how like news travels fast in the White House. The EAs are like the conduit of gossip, basically. We have a really great scene between Donna and Josh where for once they are not flirting with each other. They're talking about Leo and what we're going to do to protect Leo.
But this is just such a like couples sidebar.
It is very much like we've been together 10 years, like our friend's in trouble. What's the plan?
Literally.
So Donna has gone to Margaret and they've been talking to each other. Margaret has disclosed to Donna about what's going on with Lillian Field and about the fact that Leo went to rehab. And so Donna has come to Josh and said, I spoke to Margaret. What the fuck's going on with Leo? Like, what can we do? And understandably, Josh is like, you guys can't talk about this. Because if you've spoken about it, that means more people know.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because you're gossiping, but just like somehow the word will get out.
Yeah.
And we're trying to keep a lid on this. And we have like a little heated moment where Donna's like, no, like I'm not here to gossip. I want to protect him. He'd do anything for us, is what she says.
I get so irate about this that whenever two women share important pieces of information that are relevant to both women, either for their safety or just relevant work information that they need, it gets dismissed as gossip.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's useful that Donna gets to say, no.
Yeah.
I'm going to be involved in this. Like, what are we doing? What's the plan?
Yeah. I'm literally meant to be your assistant. How can I assist?
Yeah, like, don't keep stuff from me. That makes me not do my job well.
Precisely.
Cut to my worst nightmare, children in the workplace. CJ...
I did feel CJ having to wrangle these children was very you having to deal with kids. Just like in an immaculate suit, being like, over here, children.
I'm glad you said that and not me. Yeah, I mean, frankly, there are like 2 maximum children in this world that I enjoy spending time with. And all of the others, it's not for me. Not a strong maternal bone in this body. However, someone who is great with kids is Jed Bartlett.
Jed Bartlett is working the room.
Honest to God, like, it's like this group of school children that have come into the White House to do this choir thing. And he is like cutting loads of jokes, like coming in, being like, hey guys.
He has those kids in the palm of his hand. He is Barney, basically.
Yeah, he's warming up the crowd. He's working the room. And I think this is kind of the vibe that people thought Biden was going to bring.
Yeah. To be fair, Biden loves to hold a baby.
He does. Is he strong enough now? Because he's 1,000 years old. Who knows? So Bartlett's doing like all of these like fantastic bits where he's like going up and he's asking kids like, he's like, hey, how old are you? 25? And the kid's like, I'm 7. And he's like, no, you're not. Surely you can vote. Like it's, and like them being like, I guess I'm the president of Uganda. And they're like, no, you're not. You're the president of the United States. And it's like this whole like kind of groovy back and forth all the time. Where like, he's like cracking wise and these kids are losing their minds. And like the photographers are like clicking their cameras. Mandy's there with her Filofax like, yes, I've done very well.
Bartlett is like high on Christmas.
Literally like he is the king of Christmas. There's a huge tree in the background. And then Charlie comes over and just like taps Bartlett's arm and like pulls him away and just lets us know that Lowell Lydell, who was the teenager who was attacked, has died in hospital. And the writing and the performance of this moment is truly perfection. Simplicity in itself. There's no like, God damn it, or like, gonna get these bastards. Bartlett just listens and he says, okay, send flowers and I'll call his parents. And then he like looks back into the room where all these children are playing, takes a breath and then just says, okay again. And then strides back into the room and it's like the game face is on and he's back into the wisecracking because he's like, this is the job I have to do.
And that is why he was elected president of the United States.
Yeah.
And just to like take it back for a moment, like there's none of this like moral high ground bullshit of my most hated moment of Josh up until the moment we're going to get to later, where at the end of Enemies, when he was like, we talk about enemies more than we used to. I just wanted to mention that. Like, there's no, like, I'm riding in on my white horse being like the moral arbiter. It's literally just like, okay, I've taken in the information. What are the next practical steps that need to happen?
I just thought it was like really beautifully done. And like, it could have been so over dramatized in a way of like, that would kind of in a way undermine the human cost.
Yeah.
And let's move on to this devil's advocate thing because enter Sam Seaborn.
Oh my God. He's just playing the yes but card on hate crimes legislation. And it's so, he just is the devil's advocate guy. And I've just spent so much time with the devil's advocate guy in my professional life, my relatively short professional life thus far. And I just can't stand the devil's advocate
They're everywhere,
guy.
Leigh. They're everywhere and they are exhausting. So Sam Seaborn is walking down a corridor with CJ and he says, I'm not sure where we stand on this. And CJ says, I know where I stand. They threw rocks at his head.
Which is giving for me, not to say that like CJ can't have like a strong moral stance as a heterosexual woman.
Completely.
But to me, the way in which CJ is affected throughout this episode by the death of this young man, it's giving for me like I'm being impacted by this because it speaks to like a part of who I am.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, if she is a heterosexual character, then the thing that it's giving is true allyship, which is I don't have to have like a personal connection to this, but I have an understanding because I've educated myself about other people's experience. And this isn't just some horrible thing that some kids did to another kid.
Yeah.
There's like a deep like bone of homophobia in it that brings this kind of nastiness that you, Sam, don't understand.
Yeah, you've not taken the time to educate yourself on. But also I think CJ is just like giving me, I kind of internally know that I'm bisexual. It's not something that I've ever shared with anyone else. But I am having these like quiet moments of reflection throughout this episode. That's just my own narrative for CJ.
I mean, that's what I would love that because, you know, it would give me hope. For my shot with this fictional character that doesn't exist from a TV show in the 90s. But yeah, I really hate the devil's advocate thing, but I know that we have to play that for dramatic payoff. But, I hate it. For a little bit of lightness, we close out their interaction by finding out that Sam's Secret Service name is Princeton, which personally I think tracks.
Agreed.
And then she says, oh, well, mine's Flamingo. And we have this fantastic little back and forth. So CJ says, what's your Secret Service code name? Sam, they've just changed it. CJ, I know what's yours. Sam, Princeton. CJ, mine's Flamingo. Sam, it's nice. CJ, it's not nice. Sam, Flamingo's a nice looking bird. CJ, the flamingo is a ridiculous looking bird. Sam, you're not ridiculous looking. CJ, I know I'm not ridiculous looking. Sam, any way for me to get out of this conversation? CJ, I'm going to go and talk to someone else.
I love that Sam Seaborn does just fundamentally believe that like every woman needs to be told by him whether she's attractive or not.
It's just shit banter when you're like, I think I've been given a really crap code name. And your mate goes, no, it's not. No, it's not crap. It's like, no, I want you to tell me how shit it is so that we can laugh at it together.
Yeah.
Because otherwise everyone's laughing at me.
Yeah.
So let's move to Josh and just some excellent fucking drama. So Josh is trying to find out, like what he mentioned with Leo earlier, if he can get Laurie to give him some info on some other Republicans. Obviously in doing so, outing her sex work, but protecting Leo. So the new information that we get that Josh tells to Sam Seaborn is, and this makes it even more knotty, is that Leo was in rehab 6 years ago. 6 years ago, Leo was the Secretary of Labour.
Yikes. Big yikes.
Yeah, big yikes. In Josh's words, that means he was high when he was running the Labour department.
Yeah.
So this is the thing that's actually fucking huge. And I think this is the big swing that Lillian Field actually has, which is it's not about the fact that Leo was addicted to Valium, and it's not about the fact that Leo went to rehab. It's about the fact that Leo was high whilst running a department.
Yeah.
So Josh says, can we go and talk to Laurie? And I was fully expecting Sam to be like, no, I would never let you do that to Laurie. But he does actually like take a proper beat to think about it. And he kind of is like, let's go and talk to her and like explain the situation in a way. And let's like see what we can get. And I don't know, although obviously it means that like Laurie's being put in a horrible position. I'm kind of glad that Sam wasn't like, no, I'd never do that to my girlfriend. Yeah,
because he is also dating Mallory. Also, like, God knows.
Who knows? But anyway, I'm really interested. Like that, I felt like that was a very morally interesting scene for specifically Josh and Sam to have, because normally they're like so down one particular side, and for them to be like, I don't really know what the play is. Anyway, let's cut to the real dynamic duo of this show, which is Charlie and Mrs. Landingham.
What a dynamic duo. I love them.
I love them. I love that like we're like intergenerational.
Yeah.
I love that we're like a white woman and a black man. You know, one of us has been working for the president for a really long time and one of us is like new to the White House.
But we're both allied in having to be like, oh, let's keep this ridiculous man going as the leader of the free world.
Quite literally, the first thing Mrs. Landingham says is, Charlie, it's important that you remind the president throughout the day that he's allergic to eggnog.
How is that something Jed is forgetting?
Like, that's either an egg or a dairy allergy. And either way, like, that's a very specific and quite messy, like, allergy or intolerance to have.
Or
like,
it's a joke that he just loves eggnog so much that they say he's allergic because it's just something he can't stop drinking and he just always gets pissed on, which is also a very fun narrative because frankly, one glass of eggnog is enough for me and it's like too much sweetness then.
Yeah, but it's just like egg, alcohol and cream. Like what a horrible drink. But Jed does strike me as a sort of man who would like have a shellfish allergy but would be like, I love lobster. What do I care if it's going to kill me?
Yeah.
Anyway, so what we get in this scene is 2 minutes and 8 seconds of the most devastating acting performance I've ever seen on television.
Yeah.
So Charlie has kind of noticed that Mrs. Landingham's a little quiet and just has a little emotional check-in.
I know that it's like the bare minimum that we should be like educating young men about like being emotionally literate and like emotionally intelligent. But the fact that this like young 21-year-old man is like checking on his older female colleague and being like, you seem sad today.
I'm going to try and keep it together through this, but Leigh and I were just talking about this scene before we started the recording, and I had to pause and cry. So Charlie asks Mrs. Landingham if she's okay, and she responds with a beautifully written monologue, which is going back to the backstory, which we hear a little bit in The Crackpots and These Women, which is about her losing 2 sons in Vietnam. So we find out that her sons were in fact twins, and they were both medical students. They both got drafted on the same day, and they were both killed in action on the same day. And that day was Christmas Eve.
It's their anniversary.
Yeah. And the performance that the actor who plays Mrs. Landingham gives is unbelievable. And actually, Rob Lowe mentioned in an interview retrospectively that if you wanted to see a masterclass in acting, then that scene was the masterclass in acting. And I agree.
I was just reading her IMDb while you were prepping this. She didn't start acting till she was 42.
I just think that I'm so excited to see more from Mrs. Landingham, because obviously this actor is an absolute scene stealer. But she says, their lottery number came up. Their father and I begged them, but they wanted to go where people needed doctors. And their father and I begged them, but you can't tell your kids anything. It's hard when it happens so far away, because with the noises and the shooting, they had to be so scared. And it's hard not to think that right then they needed their mother. Anyway, I miss my boys.
Can I just say, actually, fuck you, Aaron Sorkin.
And then she just goes back to the work that's on her desk. And Charlie just says, okay. And like watches her for a little while and then just like leaves her and gives her the room.
When we got the like throwaway reference of, oh yeah, she lost 2 sons in Vietnam, I didn't expect it to like come back around this way.
No. And like, I'm really glad that for the character, they gave her this like a specific backstory that was more than just that fact.
And also that she's like, it's so wonderful to see someone who's like a secretary be like, she's not just there to facilitate the action and have like a couple of lines an episode. Like she's a fully thought out human being. She's
one of the core characters that's going to go through all of this show. And I also would like to say that not often, especially at the time that this show was made, are actors of that age.
Yes.
That are women.
Yes.
Given like full scenes that are about their character, where they are getting to talk about things that are affecting them and not just the like leads in the show.
Yes.
And so I think that it's testament to the writing on the show and probably that actor's performance up to this point where they would have said, let's give her that scene.
Let's give her like a really meaty scene. Yeah.
But I was borderline unwell.
Yeah.
At the end of that scene, I had to pause my DVD and cry and hug the dog for some time.
Yeah.
Should we stay with emotional devastation, Leigh, and kind of continue in like Toby's military story?
Yeah, still looking for Walter's family.
He's still looking for Walter's family. He goes to like the kiosk near the war memorial and talks to the vendor there, who is like, oh yeah, you know, there are quite a few kind of homeless veterans in DC. They tend to stay around this area, go there and ask if you want to find out. But this kiosk guy has got lots of military tattoos, and Toby says, oh, you're a veteran. And the guy says, yeah. And then just offers a handshake and they shake hands. And I'm like, that feels like Toby's saying he's one too.
There's something going on there. Also, like, he has such intense knowledge of like what the different like tattoos mean. I hope this is going to be like the Mrs. Landingham backstory where it's like we think it's just a throwaway and then we come back to it.
Yeah. So we're going to go shopping with Jed Bartlett.
He just wants to go to the bookstore. And I don't blame him. I love going to a bookshop around Christmas.
So Jed does all his own shopping, but that shopping does tend to be like kind of, vintage books. And part of me is just like, I don't see Abby Bartlett like opening a rare book on Christmas Day and that being what she wants.
I think Abby picks her own Christmas presents.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
I think they go to the department store and he's like, honey, pick out some pretty things.
I'm going to the bookstore. So Jed is going to go and do his own shopping, which means that they have to close an entire bookshop so that the Secret Service can like...
On Christmas Eve.
On Christmas Eve. It's so chaotic. It's very on brand for him. And Josh says, an hour alone with you in a rare bookstore? Couldn't you just drop me off the top of the Washington Monument? To which Bartlett responds, it's Christmas. No reason why we can't do both. Let's talk about Danny and CJ briefly because we love them. Nothing gets past our boy Danny.
No.
Just still grafting like a pro. So he says to CJ, I put together a list of reasons why you should go out with me.
Hot.
Why is that hot? Like, that shouldn't work.
It's because it's planning. It's advanced planning.
And CJ is very flustered and just responds by saying, my Secret Service name is Flamingo.
It's very much the women's necks of Christmas.
Yeah. And then he just says, nice bird. And she says, go away. And then they just sort of like split and go down different corridors. And I love them.
Yeah.
It makes me so happy. So let's just go back to the bookshop with Bartlett. And Bartlett just having a full like Tom Hanks, You've Got Mail, like just discovering books and just like passing them to Leo or Josh and just being like, an edition of such and such, such and such. We must have this. And just like everyone's got like piles of books that he's just like passing them. And then Jed, again, another moment of emotional devastation. Jed's like, what are you doing for Christmas? And Leo says, I think I'll just come into work. And then Jed being like, no, come to us for Christmas. Like, what are you doing? And then Jed clocks that like Leo's worried and just looks at him and says, it will be fine.
Ugh.
Because they're just really supportive, emotional friends.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Small bit of conjecture. Why is Jed Bartlett's energy in a bookshop just your energy in a bookshop, Leigh?
Where I leave with 47 things.
Yeah, just like scurrying around with different piles of books and being like, I'm going to come back to these. I'm just going to think about them for a minute. And then just discovering a new section and like pulling out 4 more.
Yeah.
Toby and Walter, our veteran. Toby finds Walter's brother. Extremely dark storyline.
Yeah.
So Walter's brother is also homeless.
Yeah.
And is living in this area with quite a few other veterans. Walter's brother has had, it's sort of insinuated that he's had some sort of accident.
He's either got such PTSD or he's like differently mentally abled, but there's something kind of alluded to but not directly explained.
Yeah. So one of the other veterans is like, essentially he's a child.
Yeah.
And Toby then has to try and explain to this man that his brother has died.
Cue emotional destruction for the second time this episode.
And then this kind of other veteran is helping and they're trying to, the 3 of them are trying to, everyone's trying to explain. And like Toby's like, what do you want? We should do something for a funeral. Toby's like, okay, I've got to go. And gets his wallet out and like presses some money into their hands and is like, you like take this. And the veteran's like, well, no, because you live far away. You need money for a cab.
No, he says you need money for the bus.
Yeah. Oh, so good, isn't it?
He said, you need your cash. You need your cash for the bus. You live far away. And Toby is like trying to explain. He's like, I'm an influential person. I'm a very powerful person. And
actually, he is the only character in this entire show that can say, he says the line to these 2 men who are living on the street. I'm an influential person. I'm a very powerful person. And he says it with absolutely no ego.
With complete humility.
Yeah. And then he gives them this wad of cash. And again, from any other character, that could seem like a crass and insensitive thing to do.
Yeah.
But the way that Toby does it is so, I don't know, like it doesn't feel patronizing.
No.
Yeah, but there is a human interest moment here for Toby and a character moment, and I'm just not sure what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to get back to like positive storylines. So CJ has written her own list of reasons why she can't date Danny. And she reads this to Danny, which is 100% something I would do.
100% can confirm, yeah. It's very Fiona Kingwell coded.
Yeah. And then Danny's like sat like leant back in his chair with his feet on a desk. And CJ's like there with her little glasses on and her notepaper. And he says, I'm going to ignore your list because it's ridiculous. And also I've got a crush on you. I don't like, I just love them.
Also, like someone calling me ridiculous whilst I know that they have deep respect for my intelligence is very much my way that I would like to be flirted with.
Yeah. Me too. Leo pops in because he wants to give her a note, basically, that she's talking about the hate crimes rhetoric a bit too much with the press. And once again, just CJ being like an ally to all of us by saying like, give me a reason why we should allow bigots to be bigots.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be what you're asking. I mean, like, I don't think I should dial anything down because I don't think I'm being over the top.
Yeah.
And Leo kind of doesn't really have an answer to this, which is pretty satisfying. And then CJ says that she'll cook Leo Christmas dinner.
But where is CJ's family? Because she keeps offering to cook for everyone for Christmas dinner and everyone keeps saying no. She keeps it, like, over the course of the episode, she offers it to, I think, to Sam and to Josh as well.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Why is she alone at Christmas?
Why is she alone at Christmas?
I need to know CJ's backstory. I need to know the Claudia Jean that became CJ.
I would love that origin story to be explained in more detail because, how did we get from small town Claudia Jean to CJ and DC?
Yeah.
To the secret meeting, this poor woman, Laurie, being bombarded by...
Yet again, by these ridiculous men.
I thought, as soon as the scene started, well, this is going to go terribly.
Yeah.
And did it, Leigh?
It did indeed.
It did indeed. It's not the way, it's not that it's the way he asks that's bad. It's the fact that he's asking at all.
Yeah. Also the fact that this is Josh's first time he's met Laurie is crazy.
Yeah. Laurie says, is this for real? And Sam says, yes. And so she says, then get out and we'll pretend that this never happened. Very diplomatic. She's going to make a great lawyer.
Incredible.
Then Josh just says, hey, we haven't met.
You've been in the room already for 10 minutes and you've not introduced yourself. That's entirely on you. You've shown up at this woman's house unannounced.
So rude. He then says, I don't feel like standing here and taking civics lessons from a hooker.
Which is the most unforgivable thing in a litany of unforgivable things that Josh as a character has done thus far in this series.
Because he's a liberal, white, rich man who has a much more important career, in his opinion, than her. And that's just patriarchy.
And he's a feminist until it doesn't benefit him.
Exactly. How dare he? I don't think he can come back from that. With Laurie, he says like, oh, I apologize. That was very rude.
It needed more of an apology than that.
When you're just like, well, you've just told me what you think.
He's just said the most degrading thing he could possibly say. So...
And Laurie, because she's just a brilliant character and really well written, says, you're the good guys, you should act like it. She also says, do you think only Republicans pay for sex? Which, again, is a very important thing to say because she is right. Anyway, safe to say, it did not go well. They do not come away with any information. In fact, actually, they've just upset someone who was just been trying to get on with their life.
Degraded and belittled a woman in her own home. Yeah.
So the boys go back to Leo. And obviously, understandably, he tells them off.
A side note on this scene, just way less important than anything we've just discussed, but CJ's blowout in this scene is insane. Why has she been given like a Texas trophy wife blowout?
It's unbelievably distracting.
The normal hair person must have been sick this day.
It's like they had a picture of what CJ's hair is supposed to look like and then just went entirely off-piste.
It's got so much more height than usual. Anyway.
Leo's response to being told that they'd gone to Laurie, even though he said he didn't want them to go to Laurie, was that when Sam said, we meant well, Leo just says, is that supposed to mean something to me? Which I think is the equivalent of, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
And also just like Leo being like, I know this is coming for me. Like,
Yeah.
my actions have consequences. I behaved in a way that was reckless in the past. And like, I am in the process of recovery, which means acknowledging that my actions have consequences.
And I need you to, nitwits, to stop trying to be my knight in shining armor and play the hero at all costs to whatever human debris might get in your way. And just accept that you can't fix everything.
Yeah. And that's kind of the energy that we leave this episode with. Us not really knowing what's going to happen after Christmas with Leo and how we're going to stop Lily and Fi leaking this information if we are. But it wouldn't be Christmas if we didn't finish on some romance and some love, which is that finally CJ relents.
Hey, fish boy.
Yeah, she just says to Danny, hey, fish boy, why don't you take me out tonight and convince me?
I'm dead. I swooned.
She then backtracks and says, this is a business dinner. In fact, bring your notebook.
Which again, very Fiona Kingwell coded.
Yeah.
You
yeah,
never
really
like to admit when you have a little crush, do you?
No. No, I don't. So that's nice. So we're going to leave like on the precipice that their holiday romance is going to begin. Josh does buy Donna a gift. It is not a full set of ski gear, but it is a book on the history of skiing from the Rare Bookstore that he has written like a long note to.
Which we don't get to see.
We don't get to see, but Donna cries. What did he say? Also, not to reduce it, but like, why on earth would you write in pen in a priceless vintage book?
Yeah, but also you do kind of get the sense that like she has been bringing breadcrumbs back to her EA house share, being like, no, I think he does really like me. This is what he did today. And they're like, no, like he's a playboy, Donna, like move on. Like you need to stop being in love with. And every single day I feel like she comes back being like, well, today he said this. And then he asked me to do this and he wouldn't ask me to do that. That's not a professional thing. He wouldn't ask me to do that if he didn't feel more about me than that. And I feel like she's going to bring this home tonight, like the pièce de resistance. And then they're all going to be like, oh my God, maybe he is actually in love with you.
And I think that the giving of the book is a realization point for Josh.
I think this is the moment that he realizes that he likes her.
Because he's like lent in the doorway and the way that he looks at her when she gives the emotional response is like, oh, fuck.
Do I think that he needed to scream at a woman and call her a hooker in order for him to go through the emotional journey to get to a point that there is a woman that he respects? No.
No. But it's baby steps with Josh because, you know, in many ways he's a vile human.
He's so pig-headed.
Closing out the app, Toby has organised a full-scale military funeral for this
Which just
veteran.
Absolutely ended me.
But he has to explain that to Bartlett because Bartlett's like, what's going on? I've just been told I've spent loads of money on this military funeral. And Toby's just sort of like, we need to treat our veterans better. And Bartlett just like gives Toby a little tap on the shoulder, walks away. Toby puts on his coat like to go to this funeral. Cue the arrival of Mrs. Landingham.
In her little hat and coat.
In her little winter hat and matching coat and her little handbag.
We love a cohort.
We love a cohort. And she says, Toby, I'd like to come along.
Oh.
And I cried again.
Stop it, Dolores. Stop it.
And so Toby and Mrs. Landingham go off to go to the funeral for Walter. And the rest of the gang stood by the Christmas tree in the White House, listening to the children sing. And we close the episode with Christmas cheerly, with the gang together. But honestly, I think there's a storm on the horizon.
Yeah. What will the new millennium bring?
What will the new millennium bring? Also, no talk at all of the millennium bug. And I feel like that took up a lot of space at the end of 1999. Evidently not in the White House. Anyway, a fantastic Christmas ep. Yeah. I kind of forgot that there would be Christmas episodes and like Thanksgiving episodes in this TV show. So I am thrilled at the fact that every season we're going to have a Christmas episode.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. I mean, we had emotional devastation, we had blooming romances, we had veteran backstories, we had men shouting at women. This episode really had everything at the end of the day.
Should we go into our rapid fires?
Let's. Best fashion.
Mrs. Landingham's coat with the matching hat.
Yeah. It was a late entrance right at the end of the episode, but a strong one.
It was
Definitely.
beautiful. We've also not seen Mrs. Landingham in her outerwear, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think that an honourable mention to Donna's festive sweater and skirt combo, though.
Yeah.
What could a British or Irish politician just never get away with?
Joshing with kids and pretending not to know what country they're president of.
Yeah, just all of the like joking around with the kids. 100% Josiah Bartlett just absolutely nailing that. And a British or Irish politician would die on their feet in the same scenario.
It would just be so awkward. No British MP should ever be allowed to speak to teenagers.
Honestly, like teenagers or even children, like there is just something about like an English kid, like an English like 6-year-old where they can ruin political careers.
Yeah.
So in terms of our like bingo card of guns, abortion, free speech, religion, I feel like we hit a really big one early doors with kind of like hate crimes and...
Which I suppose the argument against hate crimes legislation is free speech.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this idea of like, we can't control what people think. So therefore we can't prosecute them for thinking certain things. And like the naughtiness of that. And like, you know, we touched on this like homophobic attack in this episode. And I do think that, you know, the fact that we're in the year 2000 in this show, I wonder how much talk of LGBTQIA plus rights there will be in Bartlett's White House.
We're not very far removed from the height of HIV. And
no,
I don't think there's been any reference to AIDS.
No, which is surprising. And I wonder if we will, because another one, so the producer on The West Wing, John Wells, also is the producer on one of my other favorite TV shows, which I love, ER. And ER had quite a lot of long-running storylines, like spanning multiple seasons, surrounding HIV status and AIDS. And that was because I think that show's set in Chicago. And like there's a huge amount of press coverage of the HIV crisis in that particular city, and also like people's ability to access medical care. And so I wonder, because that show producer was able to talk about that so much.
Yeah.
In that show, if we'll be able to see that a bit more represented in DC.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interested. Man, I feel like a man. I was very angry at all of the boys this week. And so therefore my winner is Toby with, I'm an influential person, I'm a very powerful person, and being able to say that with no ego and with complete humility.
Agreed. Also, a moment for Charlie's emotional check-in with Mrs. Landingham.
Yes.
Was very like evolved masculinity.
Yeah. And what was your proudest moment as an American, Leigh?
Just all of Mrs. Landingham.
Yeah, correct. That's also mine. I just put Mrs. Landingham. That's what made me feel proud to be an American.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. I mean, I feel like I need to lie down now.
Yeah. Are we ready to dive into our little study sesh of the week?
I absolutely can't wait. Immerse me, Leigh.
Now, I realised I went down a bit of a rabbit hole last week. Apologies to the listener for that. But we are coming back strong this week in that we are recording at the beginning of Pride Month.
Woohoo!
And also, obviously, we've touched on LGBT issues in this episode. So I thought we would jump into what jobs in the West Wing and in politics, slightly more generally, have been done by openly queer people.
Yay!
So the LGBTQ Victory Institute has a non-partisan presidential appointments initiative to get more LGBTQ plus staffers into the West Wing.
That's great.
And it began kind of more casually in the Clinton administration with trying to get LGBTQ plus appointees hired, but it became more formalized under Obama, where there was a record 330 out staffers, many of whom were assisted by the LGBTQ plus Victory Institute in the kind of application process.
Brilliant. Leigh, could I ask one quick question?
Yes.
When you say non-partisan, does that mean that it's trying to be balanced between Democrats and Republicans.
As in it's saying, so regardless of whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president who's in power, they are still advocating for people to get appointments.
So it's like, we're not aligned with a party, we're just aligned with politics in general and representation.
Correct. So in 2016, at the end of the Obama presidency, they took a class photo of all of those LGBTQ plus White House staffers together. And I just sent Fiona the link so she can have a little look-see. We can also put it in the show notes so that the listener can see. Because I found it really emotional looking at this picture and knowing that every person in this picture is an out queer person.
Yeah, it is really emotional.
Isn't it so lovely? And there's all different types of gender identities and sexual orientations represented in this kind of class photo of queer staffers. Rafi Friedman Gerspin, who is in this photo, was the first openly transgender person to work at the White House under President Barack Obama when he appointed her to the Presidential Personnel Office in 2015. She was working as the recruitment director for presidential personnel, and she was the LGBT liaison at the White House when the administration released its final rule on non-discrimination in health programs and activities. And she is quoted as saying, "In May, the Department of Health and Human Services published a final rule protecting against discrimination in healthcare on the basis of gender identity. This is particularly important to transgender people of colour and those living in poverty. As a transgender woman of colour, I am proud to have been on hand when that history is made." And Rafi is in the front row, sat down in the black dress with the pink flowers.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous dress she's got on, and I love that we're seeing a pop of colour because it's a lot of navy and blue suits.
Correct. Then Ellie Schaefer, who is actually pictured next to Rafi in that photo with the pink socks, had the role of special assistant to the president and director of the visitor's office.
So Charlie is a type of special assistant, right?
He's a personal assistant.
Okay, so slightly different.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, is there would in the world of the West Wing, would Ellie and Charlie have been in the same like office of staff?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
That was just me hoping.
So Ellie is quoted as saying, "I began working with him on his Audacity of Hope book tour and was there from day one in Springfield, Illinois, and have traveled with him for 654 days. In this role, this is now in her role in the White House. In this role, I run the office that carries out the directive of the President and the First Lady to make the White House the people's house. I have the privilege of producing and managing all of the large events at the White House, from one-on-one meetings to the annual Easter egg roll with 35,000 guests. I got married last year and the President and the First Lady congratulated me and my wife, and that was a pretty special moment. They were both so genuinely happy for us."
Oh,
I just love that she's worked with him from his book tour, like before he was president, like all the way through, and she worked through both of his terms.
and also she's an events manager, so therefore, like,
some strong lesbian energy. Monique Dorsey-Neville, Deputy Chief of Staff for the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs, says, "A moment I will never forget at the White House was President Obama's response when I mentioned my partner. I was briefing him en route to the Oval Office to a stakeholder briefing in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Just a lovely walk and talk with President Obama here. It was August 3rd, 2012, and the president's birthday was the following day, August 4th, and my birthday was the day after that, on August 5th. After I finished briefing the president on the range of stakeholders at the convening, we discussed being Leos and our upcoming birthdays and what we had planned. I mentioned my partner was planning a small dinner for me with close friends. When I said partner, he didn't flinch, he didn't even blink, he just looked at me and said, 'Oh, what does she do?' That was his first question, and to me that spoke volumes." I'm crying again. I think that's just so powerful, like that you'd like I've had to come out at work before and say like, "Oh, my girlfriend," or whatever. And you get the kind of like weird, well, I suppose because I'm quite femme presenting, get the like weird head tilt and being like, "Oh, girlfriend, like I wouldn't have expected that." So it's just gorgeous to know that like over 10 years ago, President Obama was really chill about gay people. I know that it took him a while to come around on gay marriage, like longer than we would have liked, but it's nice to know that like in a personal setting, there wasn't an awkwardness.
And it's about, I suppose, a lot of it is, and the work that that this group of staff is trying to do, and the
LGBTQ Victory Institute.
What the Victory Institute, I suppose, is trying to do is like, I suppose it takes a long time to instigate in these sorts of spaces like the White House and DC in general, an atmosphere of being able to come out and that suddenly not being the only thing that...
It's not your main identifying characteristic.
Yeah. And it feels like so much ground perhaps was covered during the Obama administrations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to say, by the way, Monique is the lady in the kind of skinny trouser, white heels and the red and white top.
She looks fun.
Yeah, and also bringing some more colour to the occasion amongst all the suits.
Yeah. I feel a little bit sad that the White House under Obama was a bit of a more progressive space. And I can only assume that Trump's White House reeled that back in. Yeah.
We're now going to jump a little bit forward into Biden's White House. We're just going to skip over.
Yeah, let's
We're just going to skip over 45. And we're going to skip into Biden's White House. Karine Jean-Pierre is the current CJ Craig. So she is the White House press secretary. She is both the first out gay person and the first Black person, and therefore first woman of color to take on the role. She's an out lesbian, and she was chief of staff to Vice President Kamala Harris during Kamala Harris's presidential campaign in 2020.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
And then became deputy press secretary.
Wow.
And then when Jen Psaki, the previous press secretary, left, she was promoted up into her boss's role. And she also worked on the Barack Obama campaigns in 2008 and 2012. Jen Psaki, who was the outgoing press secretary prior to her. And I think we're actually going to take a little deep dive into the press secretary role more deeply through Jen Psaki's book that she's just released about her experience of being press secretary. But Jen Psaki said of Karine Jean-Pierre, she is passionate, she is smart, and she has a moral core that makes her not just a great colleague, but an amazing mom and human. Plus, she has a great sense of humor. And I also love that, like, the last two people who've had this huge job that we see CJ Craig doing, and CJ Craig in The West Wing is depicted as this woman who, like, doesn't really have time for a personal life, doesn't have time to be in a relationship, can't have it all. We very much get the sense that she's, like, kind of been forced to be single in order to pursue this career. And I love that both Jen Psaki and Karine Jean-Pierre have done the job with partners. They're both moms. And that just feels like a really huge step forward in the 20 years since the character of CJ Craig. And then the current Toby Ziegler, Ben LaBolt, is the first openly gay White House communications director. He was the press secretary for Senator Barack Obama when he was the senator for Illinois. He was also previously the White House assistant press secretary. And he was the head of communications for the confirmation of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who we discussed
coming back to
last
week's episode.
And President Biden said, "I look forward to welcoming him back as a first-rate communicator who's shown his commitment to public service again and again, and who has a cutting-edge understanding of how Americans consume information. I saw him fight for Justice Jackson, and he put his all into helping us make history confirming our cabinet and sub-cabinet nominees. I'm proud to have him rejoin this team." Of course, we then have Pete Buttigieg.
Pete.
I will somehow be able to roll that name off the tongue. But he was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and he was the first openly gay person to win a nominating contest when he won the 2020 Iowa Democratic caucus.
Wow.
So he actually, in the bid to become the Democratic nominee, he actually won one of the states. And he made history again in 2021 when the Senate confirmed him as the transportation secretary, making him the first out LGBTQ person to be confirmed to a cabinet post.
It's so exciting. I feel like it's such a nice study session to revel in all of the history that's been made.
Specifically in the last 4 years since the Trump administration as well.
Yeah.
After his nomination in December 2020, Pete Buttigieg recalled watching the confirmation hearing of James Hormel, who was an openly gay man who was nominated as an ambassador during the Clinton administration. And he faced awful Republican opposition. And Pete Buttigieg said, "So 2 decades later, I can't help but think of a 17-year-old somewhere who might be watching us right now, somebody who wonders whether and where they belong in this world or even in their own family. And I'm thinking about the message that today's announcement is sending to them." We're both crying again, dear listener.
Yeah.
As president, Biden has surrounded himself with LGBTQ people. 14% of the 1,500 people appointed to positions in his administration identify as LGBTQ plus. Oh God, Jesus, hold it together for like 2 more minutes. We're like nearly through this. Just some other like notable, like really big pieces of history making are Representative Sharice Davids, who is a Democrat from Kansas. She's the first openly LGBTQ Kansan to be elected to Congress. And she joined Deb Haaland that year of New Mexico as the first 2 Native American women elected to Congress, which we also love. And then we come to Sarah McBride, who I just want to kind of highlight as like, I think a future rock star in American politics. She's already a rock star, but like I think she's only going to get more name recognition as time goes on. In 2016, she was the first out trans person to speak at the Democratic National Convention. And in 2021, she was the first transgender person elected to state senate in the US. So she's not representing Delaware in Washington, D.C., she's representing her area in Delaware to the state government, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And she's now running for Delaware's single House seat in the National Congress in November. So fingers crossed for Sarah. I think she'd be brilliant. And she would then, if she wins, she'll be the first out transgender member of Congress.
Wow. That would be amazing.
It would be so amazing. And she met President Biden because obviously President Biden was the senator from Delaware for many years. She met him in a pizza restaurant when she was like 10 or 11. And her parents interrupted him and Jill eating their pizza to say how much their kid looked up to Biden. And Biden ripped a page out of his briefing book and signed it for her, which apparently she still has. Her relationship with the Bidens grew because she actually worked for Beau Biden, Joe Biden's son, who passed away, because he had several campaigns as attorney general. And she came out as transgender while the student body president at the University of Delaware. And she grew closer to the Bidens, having had a close working relationship with Beau after Beau passed away. And she says of President Biden, "I've literally seen tears in his eyes as we talk about violence against transgender people." And just an example of kind of their working relationship. She was speaking at an event about the healthcare worker shortage in Delaware. And she had a couple of missed calls. And a few minutes later, she gets a text from the White House saying the president is trying to reach you. And the president was basically calling to pick her brain about the fight for transgender rights and Beau Biden's work on the issue and the steps his own administration could take towards protecting this vulnerable community. And apparently her response was to remind him that members of the trans community take comfort from seeing the leader of the free world fight to protect their rights. And Biden has described the fight for trans rights as the civil rights issue of our time.
She's right when she says often it's about hearing it voiced. That's as powerful in action.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
And I'll just leave you with 2 other people who I think we should be keeping an eye on for the future in politics. One is Maury Turner, who's the first openly non-binary state legislator in US history in the Oklahoma House of Representatives, and is also thought to be the first Muslim lawmaker to serve in the Oklahoma legislature.
Wow.
I think they have a huge future in American politics.
Yeah, for sure.
And James Rosner is a New Hampshire Democrat, and he is the first openly transgender man elected to a state legislature. At the time of his election, there were only 8 out transgender state legislators across the US, and he continues to be the only transgender man.
Amazing representation.
So I thought that would be a slightly more heartwarming deep dive than our kind of, my breakdown last week about the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well, it's nice, isn't it? It's nice to balance. Like, there are parts of American politics that have, unfortunately, stepped back.
Yeah.
Quite significantly. But there is amazing progress being made across the board by these incredible individuals fighting for queer voices to be heard across the United States and the world. And I know I can be a bit of a pessimist and like sit in the bad news, but I think it's really good for us to celebrate and like push forward and kind of like lift up the good news stories as well.
Absolutely. So in the meantime, happy Pride, everyone.
Happy Pride.
In the words of Jojo Siwa walking out to Mighty Hoopla on Sunday, happy London Pride.
Honey.
Wrong event.
Honey, no. So I guess all that's left to say is, should we do this again next week?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. If you want to get in touch with us between then and now, please do. We love hearing from you.
We are at Queer Gals Watch, and we are also at Queer Gals Watch on Patreon. There's absolutely no pressure to contribute, but the Patreon is there if you want to join our little growing community.
Our growing community. And just swing by and have a little looky-loo.
Yeah.
Just swing on by. I'm going to go and lie down with a cold flannel on my face. Perhaps drink a few pints of water, just rehydrate after the crying. This has been devastating, Leigh. I've had a lovely time. Love you.